excited about our next guest. She is a leader of enterprise architecture at Mondelez International, and I am talking about Aura Bhattacharjee. Aura, what a pleasure to have you with us. Aura, for those of you in the audience who do not know, is a 30 under 30 award winner in IT and digitization, and she is part of the enterprise architecture team at Mondelez International. She is also a published author. Her collection of short stories is available both in paperback and Kindle format globally on Amazon, and you may want to check that out. So Aura, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today. And you're coming from a global location. Tell us all where you're coming from today.
Hello all. So I'm joining you all from India. So right now in Udaipur, India. So typically a very bustling tourism area, but yeah, now because of pandemic and COVID scenario, it's slightly lacking in terms of tourism, but hopefully we'll get back to that very soon. So Jose, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. As you already introduced me, this is Aura from the Enterprise Architecture team of Mondelez International, joining from India. What I'm going to cover today with all of you it'll start with an overview of our company and how the enterprise architecture team is structured over here in Mondelez, followed by my personal findings on RPA, robotic process automation, based on my survey around what are those areas where we have already seen a lot of implementation in RPA versus what those domains are which do hold a lot of potential for future implementation. From there, we will dive deeper into the granularity of key factors in determining RPA maturity of an organization, and eventually the role of enterprise architecture in defining the right RPA roadmap. So before I start my session, I'm sure all of you were there in Srijit's session, the previous one, where he had a poll where he was trying to ask around what are those most important attributes that you look for in conversational AI. So, and the outcome was undoubtedly product roadmap and solution maturity. I cannot tell you how strongly I resonate with Srijit on that point. And even in my session, I'm going to throw some light on how enterprise architecture plays that role, that pivotal role in defining the roadmap and maturity and organization's readiness for robotic process automation. Enterprise architecture, as we all know, is the glue between business outcome and technology landscape within an organization. Much of it will be instantly clear once I start telling you about how it's all organized in Mondelez. So within Mondelez, the business values are based on the pillars of growth, execution, and culture. Now, this is how our enterprise architecture team has aligned itself with the vision of the same pillars. The vision of our EA team is to accelerate profitable growth by leading the right solution decisions for the right business capability, for the right priority. And this vision is standing on the same values that I just showed, the same pillars that are aligned with Mondelez's business value of growth, operational excellence, and culture. EA team plays a very pivotal role in governance and strategizing of technology roadmap of an organization so that it's aligned with its business values. With more and more organizations investing in robotic process automation, I'm here to talk about the role of EA in identifying not only the existing and historical trends, but also the future opportunities in the same so as to draw the correct roadmap. Let me give you a brief overview about how the EA is structured within Mondelez. So every function in our company, be it supply chain, finance, HR, data analytics, data integration, has its own enterprise architect. Now let's categorize these functions into vertical and horizontal. The vertical ones are supply chain, finance, consumer, HR, supplier. Basically all those towers which witness maximum number of projects. Now, in order to achieve their targeted business outcomes, it's very important that these functions stay ahead of the game in terms of capitalizing relevant digital disruption, freeing up their resources to accommodate innovation trials, implementing relevant cutting-edge technology in place of legacy applications, and a lot more. Now imagine if every such function keeps on bringing new technology without proper guardrail or monitoring, it'll soon turn into what I love to call a hairball architecture of sort. And once that becomes the scenario, anytime that we decide to take out some obsolete technology or run a test and learn or try to implement some new digitalization, there will for sure be this risk that something somewhere might break. Hence, whenever there is a new solution or a new deployment coming through, these towers consult their respective vertical enterprise architect. The enterprise architect then suggests, hold on, this solution that you're talking about, I see you are bringing in a new vendor. So do you know there is an like existing vendor in another area within the company who are providing some other solution in some other area? But I know that they do have a module which can be extended for the same service. Have you thought of that? If you have thought of that, why did you rule that out? And if you don't know about that, I would suggest go back to that evaluation. Maybe it will be more cost efficient, and also because that is already a vendor which is existing with the company. So it's already better in compliance. So go back and check that and then come back and let me know what your findings are. And after all of these discussions, if and when the enterprise architect does give a go ahead, that's where the horizontal enterprise architects will come into play. So the horizontal architects will now check into the fact that, okay, so this is a solution that has been given a go ahead. So is it complied with the cloud infrastructure of the company, or is it complied with the security criticality assessment, the network of the company, and what's the cost that is going to be implemented, and so on. Now, Mondelez is a highly consumer-centric company. So bringing joy to our consumer is something that our principles revolve around. So we are always on that constantly evolving journey to explore opportunities, leverage disruptions, automate tasks, and so on. The reason this is even more important is because that's how the entire sector of CPG is behaving like. So every time, even our competition is actually focusing on like how we can implement intelligent automation, for example, in enhancing our consumer experience, or to further integrate our supply chain to make the entire manufacturing to distribution more seamless, to ensure the reach of our product, how we can implement RPA in automating repetitive manual tasks, for example, in finance. It's important because for us in Mondelez, our products bring joy to your life, and it's only an understatement to say how important happiness is today. Also, consumer needs and purchasing behavior are constantly changing. So while we have new technology acting as a catalyst, why not leverage them for business innovation to constantly cater to these kind of consumer needs? Because of these, what happens is there is a difference in the number of projects which actually come through various towers. So number of projects which will come through, say, consumer tower will be much more as compared to the number of projects which will come in through, say, finance or HR. Monitoring this is very important. Monitoring the number of projects which are coming through and whether the projects are going through the right processes or not. And that's where I step in, because this needs to be monitored by a very tower agnostic person. So that's where the role of governance lead comes into play. So as a governance lead of the enterprise architecture team, I have developed metrics to track the EA workflow progresses across all towers. Now, this will give you a glimpse of the template of the dashboard that I work on. What happened here was, initially when I had to work on these KPIs and metrics to check the flow of projects in different towers, I was doing it in a very manual way. So there were a lot of repetitive tasks over here for which I was doing a lot of calculation on Excel, and it was easily taking up. So it's a monthly KPI set that I used to publish, and for that I used to easily set aside half a week's time. So the first dashboard that you're looking at, that would look at all the projects that are coming through, whether they have very strong architectural impact or they are very simple projects, whether they're aligned with the tower roadmap or not. And the other dashboard that you are looking at, that's around application portfolio management. So that's another area where Mondelez Enterprise Architecture team takes a lead on. So that's around, okay, how many applications fall in the sunset category? So when I say sunset, that means how many of them are supposed to be disinvested, how many of them are being retired, and whether that's matching the target number or not, and a lot of those. So I identified that I was doing a lot of repetitive tasks and error-prone steps repeatedly over like half a week's time every month over there. So I clearly understood this is some area where we do have opportunity to further automate. So we implemented automation through Power BI, and the whole thing today, as of now, the whole thing happens within, say, less than half an hour time. So it's easily a cut down from half a week to half an hour time. So, and my point is, people often talk about automation eating up people's jobs, right? But hey, I'm honestly confessing that I'm more busy than ever, because what automation has done for me is that it has freed up more valuable time for me, so I can do more impactful work with all my freed up time. So that's where the importance of automation comes into play. Now, besides governing or guardrailing the incoming projects, the enterprise architecture team is also responsible for drawing up the future technology roadmap of the company. So instead of simply aligning on the RPA projects that are already happening in the legacy area, like finance or supply chain, EA provides that rich insight on what are those other areas which can also witness RPA in future. So EA is not the kind of field where it's okay for you to get comfortable in your own skin. So for the EA team to be perceived as the technology expert by the rest of the organization, it's important for EA to implement technology in their own process as well. Like I said, we implemented automation in the very KPI governance part. Besides this, the other area where we implemented automation within EA was the EA workflow itself. So it's like a process workflow where all the technology projects that are coming in need to be aligned among various EAs, like I was talking about. So that was happening in a manual way. And that's where we recognized that we can further integrate the whole process end to end. And I'll come shortly to that. So it's a journey where you have to constantly upgrade your knowledge and extend the horizon of your skill set. So based on all of this experience, what I figured was that intelligent automation, clearly it's an umbrella for capturing all of these sub processes where we have RPA, robotic process automation, where we have chatbot for collaboration, we have artificial intelligence that clearly cuts across the cognitive area, learning, problem solving, and visual perception. So all of these, when implemented to process and or data, they should be able to improve your business performance. Now I've highlighted data over here because that's where I'm coming to. So the processes part is something which is sort of legacy. So we already have a lot of RP implementation in areas of processes. Data is one area where we still have a lot of opportunity to implement RPA. How I came to that conclusion will be clear once I show you this research of mine. So while from the EA perspective, I did have this visibility of what kind of RPA solutions are being implemented in our company, I still decided to reach out to folks outside of my organization and industry through a survey to understand what are those areas where RPA implementations are more saturated versus what are those areas where we can still have more and more implementation. Turns out that if I take customer, supplier, and supply chain management as a bucket area, that's where we have had major implementations of RPA-IA. So 44% of the participants from across various other companies, they voted for this bucket. 28% from within Mondelez have seen RPA implementation in the same. And then if we look at more of a persona-based voting, then more than 50% of analysts, HR, supply chain manager, marketing managers, they have witnessed RP implementation in this bucket itself. The next highest implementation comes in finance. Of course, we have all heard about the RPA implementations in invoicing and billing. So 38% of the participants from across the companies again voted for this. 14% from within Mondelez have witnessed RPA implementation in finance area. Persona-wise, more than 50% of consultant, financial, and sales manager have witnessed similar implementation in finance. Besides all of these, a few sectors like engineering, education, finance, business intelligence, they do have RPA implementation in HR area and people management. Clearly, one area where opportunity lies for future implementation is the whole data area. So data governance, data orchestration, KPI generation. That is one area which we should definitely focus on for future. So Mondelez has seen some implementations in this area. So our EA team has been running test and learn, for example, to evaluate various technology for implementing RPA in data orchestration. Because while we already have RPA in mainstream words like billing, invoicing, people management, etc., it's challenging to find the right RPA tool to be used widely for data creation and maintenance. So that's where the future lies. Now, based on the insight from this survey that I did, we now know that opportunity lies in implementing RPA in the analytics, data orchestration, and data management area. So data orchestration is actually automation of the entire data-driven processes from end to end, including preparing data, making decisions based on that data, and then taking actions based on those decisions. It's like a process that often spans across different systems, department, and types of data. Since we are talking specifically of RPA for data orchestration, we recognize that first, that automation is setting up one task to run on its own, while orchestration is automating many tasks as a process or workflow. And the key challenge that is common across most of the companies and organizations is having unstructured data across the entire organization. So how we handled at Mondelez was through this vision that included accuracy, which meant that data should be right in the beginning itself so that it's easy to establish governance. Efficiency, which meant that data should be sustainable, clean, and consistent across various systems. And integration, that is to enable the right business decisions at the right time using that accurate data that I just spoke about for end-to-end planning. Now, with each functional tower that I was talking about having an enterprise architect, it's the enterprise architects who take that ownership to come together and have the dialogue around how to ensure that the enterprise level master data do not exist across the functions in silo. And instead, there is a single source of truth in place. Now, in case of various versions of master data existing in silo, a lot of time and effort would go in manual labor of orchestrating the same. And I have personally faced it in the past. Assessing the impact analysis, ownership in terms of both data and cost, stakeholder alignment, whether to get a new tool or extend module from an existing vendor, due diligence of vendors in order to identify the right solution. The EAs align on all these decisions for data orchestration. For instance, according to a study by Forrester, in case of vendor selection, there are two categories of RPA vendors which need to be considered. One, RPA generalists, and second, RPA niche players. So the RPA generalists are suitable for broad level tasks and performances. So their AI capabilities are more suitable for IT and business leaders who want to prepare for any kind of automation request that might come from their business counterparts. The RPA niche players, on the other hand, they offer very industry or process specific AI capabilities, specialized AI capabilities that exclusively address dedicated markets such as healthcare or provide automation solutions for very specific business processes like anti-money laundering, mortgage lending, automating quotes, or predicting your next customer in the financial services, and a lot more. So they train AI-supported bots, for example, for narrow use cases, and therefore provide much faster processing with greater confidence than the RPA generalist. So it's clearly about two different kinds of necessity. So whatever fits your company necessity should be brought into the company. After having identified the right kind of vendors, the next vital part in defining roadmap comes in identifying the metrics to know which areas to focus on. And here I'll bring in another study by Forrester. So this study focuses on all these metrics, and it says, so basically the study was done in Asia Pacific, and it concurs that the RPA maturity level is determined by people, process, technology, and governance. The reason Asia Pacific was chosen for it is because the region has witnessed a lot of RPA implementation in the back office processes, and parallelly it has also witnessed growth of local investment and emergence of new vendors. So the governance framework in Asia Pacific is still emerging. The study says that nearly 60% of those who had been interviewed agreed that they had established processes for robot lifecycle management, board governance, and compliance. And less than half of the respondents had established a structured cadence of governance, which was in line with their business. So from this study, one key takeaway that I saw was that the advanced firms diverge the most from the beginners in terms of governance and process, because it's in a way it's very simple, right? Because people and technology are a given. So if you have to up your RPA game, you need to implement the best fit technology, and you need to invest in upskilling your people. So those two are pretty much taken for granted. Those have to be there. Beyond that, if an enterprise wants to stay ahead of the RPA game, it needs to focus on governance and process, because those are the points which are going to become your differentiating factor. Now let's close the loop by trying to see what we just saw in the study, combining that with what is exactly done in Mondelez. So for that, I'll give you a very brief idea about how the enterprise architecture process works. So in the enterprise architecture process within Mondelez, every project comes in at an ideation stage. So at this stage, it's just a concept. We call it a concept. It's like an idea which is coming. Some function wants to implement some kind of RPA technology, or any kind of technology for that matter. So it has come to the EAs, and the EAs will take a look at it, and then they decide, okay, is it a very simplistic deployment or enhancement kind of project which we can approve right away, or whether it's something that is going to need more architectural evaluation, something that is going to have more cross-tower impact. In that case, we will have to have more documentation, architectural documentation, which will need further alignment across a lot of stakeholders. So in that case, we should bring it to one of our global forums where we will review it together and then take the next step to decide whether it can be signed off or not. Now, the outcome of this process, this goes to the next stage, which is called portfolio management. And from portfolio, it goes to the finance, and it's like a long flow of processes which keep happening one after another. So far, till like a month back in our company, the EA and portfolio processes have been in silo, leading to a lot of extra effort in maintaining the project mappings and enterprise level data. As a very recent automation development, what we are doing is we are integrating all the processes end to end. So the EA process, the portfolio stages, the financials, all are coming on a single platform. So the workflows and the erstwhile manual alignments will be now better automated. And also we are like another step closer to having a single source of truth for enterprise level data. Since we're automating multiple workflows over here, this is also an example of orchestration. So this actually triggered further enlightening about how we can implement the same kind of automation in data orchestration as well. So once the data is structured, we can have like more robust platform for RPA implementation in terms of like repetitive tasks which happen in order to cash or people management, payroll, etc. That's a norm. However, a huge potential lies in implementing RPA at the very stage of structuring the unstructured data as well. So RPA can be implemented in the very flow of preparing, cleansing, and massaging and structuring data, basically what I was referring to as data orchestration. So we at Mondelez are in the stage of determining this part, and our enterprise architecture team is developing the roadmap for RPA through process, governance, technology, and people. The same metrics which I just showed from the Forrester research, and here is how. So if we look at the very aspect that I was talking about in terms of integrating the siloed processes and automation of workflow, so all of these fall under process. Next, we already have automated KPI generation, which I was talking in the beginning, and we are working towards strengthening master data governance by establishing that single source of truth which comes under governance bucket. Mondelez Enterprise Architecture is also exploring opportunity to enable further flexibility via the plug-and-play feature of API of modular architecture for user-friendly RPA platform. And simultaneously, we are also laying a stronger foundation for cloud infrastructure modernization and AI/ML. So all of these come under technology. EA team here also leads through thought leadership, community of practices, and community development around various technology expertise, and directs investment in right resources for RPA, which is nothing but taking care of people. So process, technology, governance, and people, the same metrics which we saw in the Forrester study. Now, as the governance lead of EA, I follow this approach of slicing and dicing everything from various perspectives and present them from different scenarios. So far, we saw an overview of what we are doing across people, process, technology, and governance. Now we will see how we are doing all of it via a more of a persona-based approach, how we are doing and who are exactly doing it. So let's pick up process and technology first. Now, all of those activities that I defined in these two buckets are handled by very process-specific stakeholders like project managers, solution owners, solution architects, and they have the key responsibility of process execution. Now, let's start looking at the bucket of people. So when we say people, it's the personas like change management stakeholders, continuous improvement leads who come into play. They cut across process, technology, and people in terms of alignment on change and process improvement and communication, and including various persona-based learning. Add to it governance. And that's where enterprise architecture comes into play. If you look closely here, the enterprise architecture will cut across all the 5 buckets of process, technology, governance, and people. So we have 2 personas here. One is enterprise architect, who have this key responsibility of continuous process improvement, providing in-house consulting to the company in terms of technology, and ownership of how to uplift people's skills. And then there is a second persona of planning and governance lead, where I come into play. So where we have collaboration with multiple stakeholders for the process improvement, KPI or metric-based monitoring of people process performance, and defining the learning path for upskilling people. So with that, let's try to revise and summarize the entire gist of today's Connect that we had. So first, we know that majority of the RP implementation is happening today in customer, supplier, and supply chain management area, followed by financial transaction. So these are the legacy areas where we have been witnessing RP implementation for some time. HR, people management are also some of the areas which follow next. So these are areas where we do see a lot of RP implementation. However, a very large opportunity lies in implementing RPA in data analysis, master data governance, data orchestration area itself. The key is to identify which vendor will play that key role, will play that right role for your organization in order to achieve that. So we saw how we have RPA generalists and RPA niche players in the market, and how to determine that, how to strengthen our company's readiness in terms of structuring the data by utilizing the right tool for RPA foundation. In order to have that successful implementation, it's always, and I'm always focusing a lot on metrics. So here as well, I'll focus on KPIs and metrics for governance purposes. So we saw about 4 key metrics which determine the level of maturity, that an enterprise is going to achieve in terms of RPA. So there we have governance, process, people, and technology. And out of all of these, according to Forrester, governance and process are the ones which will determine how much you're going to get differentiated compared to the other players in the market. So like every time I like to tell, I like to close my like entire sharing through a story. So a fun story over here. So in our office gym in Mondelez, we have like two very good instructors, trainers. So one of the trainers was telling us this funny story that in another gym where he used to provide training earlier, so he had a client who had come in and he wanted to develop biceps. So he approached the trainer and he asked him like, which exercise should I do? So the trainer suggested him this one, the bench plus dumbbell press, and the trainer suggested that you do it. Then I'll come back to you and check how the progress has been. So in order to teach him, our gym instructor showed him with only one hand, showed it with his right hand and then said, yeah, okay, let me come back to you and check how the progress has been, so whether I should increase the weights or not or do any modification. So after 1 month, the instructor checks back with the client and the client says, yeah, it has been very good, absolutely fine. So far I've done it with the right hand and I hope now I should start with the left hand, and it's a true story. So the instructor was pretty shocked to hear that he had been doing only with the right hand because the instructor had shown him with the right hand in the beginning. So he meant to say that, you know, this is not how it was supposed to be done. You should have done with both the hand parallelly, but never mind, we'll figure that out. So this is a perfect example. So I would, if I can have a comparative study, then the instructor, the gym instructor is equivalent to an enterprise architect, and the client is no one but the business side stakeholder of the company. So the enterprise architect did show what the roadmap should look like and what should be done as a solution. But what was lacking here was constant monitoring, constant guard railing, possibly through some like weekly KPI or regular cadence, which could have removed that communication gap between them, and the result could have been achieved in less than like what it will need now. So that's one example which I wanted to close the session with. And thank you very much. I'm open to Q&A now, so you all can find me on LinkedIn. And that's a small snippet of how my book looks like, which is now available on Kindle as well as paperback format on Amazon. And with that, I would like to close my session. Thank you.
Thank you, Aura. What a great view of the journey that you have been on with enterprise architecture, robotics process automation, and Mondelez. First question is just to situate the audience a little bit in terms of the maturity and the development of, you know, enterprise architecture as a discipline, if you will. And it's to use the analogy of working out. You know, we can always work out here and there, but to really progress, we have to develop the discipline and the consistency around it. So tell us a little bit about just a kind of a big picture. Where did Mondelez start on this journey for enterprise architecture, and then when RPA became part of that?
Interesting. So I have been a part of this enterprise architecture team since 2018. Yeah. So a long journey, and I have seen it getting transformed drastically. So when I started out, a lot of these tracking of projects or figuring out where different towers are at in terms of say approval workflows. So even the workflows used to be pretty more manual back then. So all of this tracking governance used to happen in a very, very manual process. So, and I used to be the single person army who would be handling it. So it used to easily take up a lot of time for me. One key thing is what I learned at times in a hard way is that it lies a lot on yourself to figure out where automation can be implemented. Nobody else is going to come to you and say, hey, you know, you are spending a lot of time in this manual task, so why not we automate it for you? That's not going to happen, especially in a role like enterprise architecture, where you are supposed to be the in-house consulting team for the company for technology. You have to have that ownership. So a lot of time it was me who went and told, or either I went and spoke to the innovation team and figured out what kind of RPA technology is there in the market, or I would go and talk to my line manager saying, hey, you know, this is one work which I think can be automated, because I'm literally doing like a lot of repeated tasks for a very long time. So that's when we started exploring like what can be further done. So today when I look back, a lot of those workflow that I used to do manually have been integrated end to end, and those happen in a more automated way. So that's where we implemented automation. Plus this governance part, which I was talking about, the dashboard, which we were like doing in a very manual way. I was doing in a manual way. So that also got automated, which reduced my time from half a week to less than half an hour. So that's how we have been, and we are on a constantly evolving journey, because even today we are doing a project where we are automating, like I was saying, the entire end-to-end process. So that's how the journey has been.
And what is the process in the company? I mean, you have 80,000 employees, you have you're globally distributed. How do you identify what you need to work on, and what is the process of identifying and prioritizing the opportunities?
So that's where the vertical towers and vertical functions come into play. So it's not like the enterprise architecture team is sitting as a central decision maker and say that, okay, we are spread across all these areas and all these functions, so we can bring in technology. That's not how it happens. So it's usually either the technology counterparts of the business. For example, in consumer, we have consumer side business, and we have a technology counterpart who looks into all the digitalization of consumer experiences. So they typically bring in solutions and suggestions that, hey, you know, this is, and that's what often happens differently in different geography as well. So they bring in solutions, they suggest solutions. And the thing is, not every time everything gets scaled right away. So that's where test and learn and importance of running POC in the right process comes into play. So first, test and learn comes into play. And then that's where the enterprise architects often step in and they say, hey, okay, the solution looked good on paper or in a test and learn format, but from our expertise and knowledge, we really know this is not something which we can scale up or roll out in further geography within modules. So this needs to be guarded right here. Or often they would say, yeah, this looks like a good solution, and from our experience, we know it's going to make the process more efficient. So it's really a lot about all those stakeholders coming together and taking that decision.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for providing that perspective. If you look, shifting a little bit more towards starting a bit more of a technical track, if you will, William Fuller has a question about unstructured data, and he would like you to say a little bit more about unstructured data. You talked about that in your conversation. What does it look like at Mondelez, and how do you work with and extract meaningful information from unstructured data?
Lot of examples in that area, and I'm sure anybody from an enterprise of the size of Mondelez will be able to resonate with that. We have a lot of data, a lot of important data, but often what we see is when I say unstructured, we often see that multiple versions of the same data set will actually exist like amongst various teams, for example. So somebody created a master data, very good, like a good file. It has all the data, all the information that got a simple example that got emailed to somebody, and then the person is from a different team, and that person starts working on the data. So very soon we have like several versions of the same data, and this we faced in a lot of areas. We faced in finance, we faced in application portfolio management, and like I was saying, we often would face it in enterprise architecture team itself because we had in siloed processes. So that's where we actually realized that this cannot continue, or to have a better practice, we should have like the single source of truth for data, and that's where we really started working on it. So the idea is to not stay comfortable with the way it is, and that's why today we have this project running where we are integrating all the end-to-end processes in enterprise architecture. So what used to happen earlier was, if I have to give an example, we had like siloed data from enterprise architecture process and portfolio process. So somebody somewhere had to do that mapping between the portfolio IDs and the enterprise architecture process project IDs. So it used to be often like many to many, many to one sort of mapping, which was okay, but that can be done better. So today when we are going to move to that totally integrated process end to end. It's going to be a complete pure one-on-one mapping, and nobody has to do that mapping. So all the projects will already be mapped end to end, starting from the enterprise architecture ideation phase that I was talking about, till all the way to the financial and architectural review phase, which is like the end output of the process. So that's how we are tackling all of these areas one by one.
Excellent. And another question that comes associated with what you just talked about is that as you're building this a structure for data, a structure for processes, a structure for governance, ownership is very important. Data ownership, process ownership, and it sounds really good. And but it's really hard to do in large organizations because you have competing priorities, you have people, it's unclear often who should be the owner for certain data types and certain processes in the organization. Sounds like a good thing to be a process owner, but then some people want to run away from it. Others want to complain about things, but they don't want to own it. So it's quite complex within, especially large organizations like yours, to establish meaningful ownership for data and ownership for process. Guide us a little bit through that experience that you're having. What is it like for you?
Yeah, I can go on and on about that because I have been owning the the data and the governance part for a long time, and absolutely spot on. I mean, when you say that there's a lot of challenge in terms of owning that kind of data, especially what I've seen is, say someone who is owning some other data, like finance or anything for that matter, and so for a long time, I'm working with that person. I know that person is the key owner, the go-to person for all those data. And then suddenly I get to know, okay, the person has left or the person has transferred that ownership to somebody else. And then there is this whole new cadence that's going to come up. So those challenges are always there, and more so in large organizations. But I think two things about it. So one is how I handle it, and the other thing is how it can be done better. So how I handle it is because I have been in this process for a long time, so I know whatever change is happening in any area, like be it the enterprise architecture process integration that we are doing, or application portfolio management that I am doing. So I have established that fact that come what may, no matter how automated things are becoming, but I will be there who will be the go-to person for any kind of data query that you have. Anything that breaks anywhere, it's my responsibility. So for example, when we are doing this whole enterprise architecture portfolio process integration, so one area is that we have to integrate the towers, the functions. And often what happens is, it's a very small example, but in big companies like this, we have organizational restructuring, because of which the towers keep either merging or splitting up, or they change their responsibilities. So unless I step up and I take that ownership, that no, whatever is going to happen, whatever change is going to be reflected on the system should go through me, and I should be there, right, working with the vendor or with portfolio team if required, to ensure that it's in right place. So as long as I'm doing that, it's fine. Now, if I say, okay, whatever the portfolio team has provided to the vendor, I'm fine with that. There is no need to check further. Then I'm sure in future, at some point, something is going to break. So it's about having that ownership yourself. And then the next challenge that comes into play is about when we have multiple people at different stages owning it, like somebody has left or somebody has changed the team, and then there is a new ownership about data. So that's all about, again, that challenge will remain as long as we are doing a lot of it in manual way. So for the teams which still have a manual way of maintaining data, like only through Excel and only keeping on drives and sharing, there the challenge is going to remain, versus the teams who have automated that part already, who have already established a better way of integrating a lot of things and then having the data in place. For them, the transition is going to become more easy. And that's where I think the data orchestration part and implementing RPA in data orchestration and cleansing that I was talking about comes into play.
Aura, and I want you to come back and just spend an entire session orchestration when we meet again. And we actually have a conference coming up on enterprise architecture, and there will be lots of opportunities to go deeper on that. Unfortunately, today we are out of time, but I want to say a big thank you to you on behalf of our global audience for sharing your expertise, real practical implementation of RPA in a very large organization with the challenges and opportunities that come in a context like that. Thank you for being so transparent, so incisive in your approach, and in sharing that with all of us. We're very grateful for your participation.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the audience and Jose to you as well. Have a good rest of day.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Aura Bhattacharjee directly from Mondelez International to the world. And what a great reveal of her journey with RPA and intelligent automation at a very large organization. And we're going to take a break now. And when we come back, we're going to wrap the conference with a masterclass on RPA implementation on very, very important industry. We're going to be talking to the financial services director of quality and transformation at Morningstar Financial Services. And Morningstar has been through a tremendous transformation and using technology as part of that transformation. And Marco Chimura is going to be with us at the top of the hour. He's going to talk to us about how to control your robots, designing an effective RPA governance program. Governance is important for any organization. On high-risk financial services organizations, it's even more so. Lots of regulation to deal with, lots of high-risk operations going on. How do you bring robots into that, and that in a way that that it's compliant, the way that it's safe, in the way that it accelerates innovation and manages risk simultaneously? So true practitioner, true leader who has done it, continues to do it, and you can learn directly and ask questions directly to him at the top of the hour. So I'll see you back at the top with Marco Chimura.